Part 1. 20 Lessons for the Person Living with Schizophrenia. Lesson 1. Recognizing the mind's experiences. What is really happening? What you experienced during the episode may have seemed frightening, incomprehensible, or beyond the boundaries of known reality. Many people who go through psychosis for the first time feel that something inhuman, strange, or shameful has happened. Yet what you lived through is a phenomenon well known to medicine and psychology, described, researched, and possible to manage. Schizophrenia is not a sign of weakness, failure, or lack of intelligence. On the contrary, it affects people from various backgrounds, often extremely sensitive, creative, and of high intellectual ability. History shows that people of great talent and influence also faced it. Among those in whom symptoms of schizophrenia or related psychotic disorders can very likely be recognized, we can name, among others, John Nash, a brilliant mathematician and Nobel Prize laureate, author of game theory; Mary Todd Lincoln, the wife of United States President Abraham Lincoln; Philip K. Dick, one of the most famous science fiction writers; Vincent van Gogh, whose letters and behavior clearly indicate psychotic experiences; Ludwig Boltzmann, a physicist whose theories remain fundamental to thermodynamics to this day; Vaslav Nijinsky, one of the greatest dancers of the 20th century. These examples are not meant to create sensation. They are meant to show one thing: you are not alone, you are not an exception, and nothing has happened within you that makes you lesser. A psychotic episode does not take away your humanity, it is one of the possible human experiences. Modern psychiatry understands this experience far better than ever before. The symptoms that seemed incomprehensible or supernatural to you have their source in biochemical processes in the brain. And because we know them, we know how to work with them, both pharmacologically and through therapy, which is crucial in returning to balance. This lesson is meant to help you understand something fundamental: what happened has meaning. It has a cause. It has a name. And it is possible to manage. You no longer need to wander through guesses or punish yourself for experiences that were not your fault. Here begins your understanding of the illness, gently, calmly, and without judging yourself. The point is for you to be able to look at your own experiences from a distance and learn to distinguish what is a thought from what is a symptom. Next, we will move on to what schizophrenia really is, how its symptoms arise, and why your emotions during the episode were so intense. What schizophrenia is? Schizophrenia is an illness of how the brain functions, not an illness of character, morality, or personality. It does not mean madness, loss of reason, or permanent detachment from reality. It is a disorder in which the brain begins to function differently, especially in the areas responsible for interpreting stimuli, regulating emotions, filtering thoughts, and maintaining a sense of safety. The simplest way to describe it is that schizophrenia is an overload of the system, something like a sudden short circuit in the network that disrupts smooth functioning. The brain continues to work, sometimes even more intensely than usual, but it loses the ability to properly organize incoming information. This is why some thoughts suddenly seem more real, more threatening, or more significant than they actually are. To understand this better, it is helpful to look at schizophrenia as a disorder of interpretation rather than imagination. Your brain receives the world, but it does not always manage to assign the right meaning to those signals. It is as if a radio had lost perfect tuning. The sound still comes through, but it mixes with crackling, interference, and sometimes with a foreign station. Modern psychiatry knows well where these disturbances come from. During an episode, certain brain pathways become overactive, and the level of dopamine, a neurotransmitter responsible among other things for motivation, reward, and the sense of threat, rises in the areas that normally filter information and assess its credibility. As a result, thoughts that in a healthy state would be rejected as irrelevant suddenly become central, intense, and difficult to distinguish from facts. What is extremely important is that this is not your fault. It is not a psychological weakness or a flaw of character. It is a state that can occur in any human being if their brain is placed under sufficiently great biological and emotional strain. Although the symptoms of schizophrenia can be intense and frightening, the illness itself does not mean that a person loses themselves. It is still you. It is your mind, only temporarily overloaded and in need of support. Medications help quiet this chaos, and therapy allows you to understand what happened, reorganize the experience, and learn to recognize the difference between your own thoughts and the brain's reaction in a state of overload. How symptoms arise when a psychotic episode begins. A person often feels as if the world has suddenly changed its rules. Thoughts accelerate, images appear out of nowhere, emotions become intense to the limits of possibility, and ordinary events seem filled with hidden meaning. One may feel that the mind has detached from normal reality and is creating its own, more dramatic, full of symbols and signals. In reality, nothing detaches or breaks. The brain simply works too fast and without filtering, like a computer trying to run too many applications at once. Information keeps coming in, but the system that organizes it works too intensely or chaotically. It is this lack of filtering that makes ordinary thoughts seem threatening, extremely important, given by someone, or directed against you. There is a mechanism in the brain that normally works like a personal reality sensor. It decides which signals are important and which should be ignored. During an episode, this filtering is disrupted. Imagine a radio that loses its station and begins picking up several frequencies at the same time. All the sounds are real, they just come too fast, too loudly, and too chaotically to be sorted. In this state, the brain may incorrectly connect facts with emotions. When anxiety is rising in the background, an ordinary sound, a remark from someone, or a stranger's glance may be interpreted as a threat. Not because anything dangerous is actually there, but because the brain is desperately trying to find meaning, to assign significance to the internal tension. That is why auditory hallucinations, voices, often sound like comments filled with worries or accusations. They are not something supernatural. They are the internal echo of your emotions, which the brain projects outward because its normal function of distinguishing a mine from not mine has been overloaded. Delusions arise through the same mechanism. The mind receives many signals that it cannot organize, and it builds from them a logical, though incorrect, story. This is a natural reflex. The brain hates chaos and will do anything to make sense of what it feels. Delusions are therefore an attempt to understand an intense, difficult internal state, not a fantasy, not an absurdity, not a conscious decision. None of this is your fault. You did not choose what you see, what you hear, or what you feel. These were processes occurring in your brain without your consent or will. Research shows that during an episode, several areas of the brain, especially the limbic system, responsible for emotions, and the prefrontal cortex, responsible for evaluating reality, operate in conflicting rhythms. It is like two conductors trying to lead the same orchestra. The music still plays, it just loses rhythm, the melody becomes dramatic, and the harmony disappears. The good news is that this chaos is reversible. Medications help the brain return to a more stable rhythm, and therapy teaches you to observe your thoughts without falling into interpretations that are not true. What once seemed incomprehensible becomes, over time, understandable and once again manageable. Recognizing your own experience is one of the most important steps on the path to recovery. Is learning to recognize the difference between what is your true experience and what is a symptom of the illness. This is not at all obvious or easy, especially when, during an episode, everything seems equally real, intense, and meaningful. But the truth is this: in schizophrenia, part of what you feel, think, and interpret is yours, and part is only a reaction of an overloaded brain. Understanding this distinction brings enormous relief, because it allows you to see that you are not your symptom. The episode does not define your character or your worth. In practice, it looks like this: your self is like a steady light. The symptoms are like a storm that covers this light for a moment but does not extinguish it. The storm is loud, intense, chaotic. The light is quiet, calm, and unchanging. As you learn to separate one from the other, the storm gradually loses its power because you stop treating it as a description of who you are. During an episode, the brain creates interpretations that feel true, but are actually reactions to inner chaos. That is why catastrophic thoughts appear, a sense of danger, beliefs about conspiracies, or signals from the environment. These interpretations have great power only when you accept them as mine. When you learn to look from a distance, their power diminishes. This distance is not about fighting or denying. It is about gentle observation. This is a thought, not a fact. This is a feeling, not a verdict. This is an echo of emotions, not the voice of truth. The ability to observe your own experience is like an external witness, without judgment and without interpretation, is one of the most effective forms of stabilization. Buddhism calls this mindfulness, calmly noticing the phenomena in the mind without automatically identifying with them. With time, you will start to see a certain pattern. Symptoms are intense, sudden, marked by strong fear or a sense of threat. Your real thoughts are calmer, slower, more logical. Symptoms have a commanding, unpleasant tone, full of tension. Your own thoughts have an ordinary, human tone. The point is not to be able to separate everything right away. This is a process that you learn gradually, sometimes millimeter by millimeter. But each such millimeter restores your freedom. And each day you can come to a point where you say to yourself gently, "That was a symptom. And I am more than that. The voice of emotions. Every psychotic episode has its own dynamics, but one thing is common to almost all experiences: emotions become huge, overwhelming, intense to the limit. These are not ordinary feelings, they are emotions multiplied, as if someone had turned all the knobs in the brain up to maximum. Most often, anxiety appears in the background. It does not have to be fear of something specific, it is more like a sense of general danger, as if the world suddenly became foreign, unpredictable, and your body entered a state of readiness to run. This anxiety is not a reaction to a real danger, but to what is happening inside the brain. When the dopaminergic system works too intensely, the world begins to look different, and emotions interpret this different world as dangerous. There also appears a feeling of being lost, as if a familiar place suddenly changed shape. Some people describe it as unreality, others as feeling like being in a dream, still others say that the world looks normal, but feels different. This experience is often frustrating, because it is hard to name it, and the mind tries at all costs to find an explanation. And it is exactly then that the first interpretations are born: someone is watching me, something is wrong, this is not a coincidence. Emotions can also take the form of excessive arousal or euphoria, especially in the initial phase of an episode. A person may feel a surge of energy, specialness, confidence, the sense that they have discovered a deeper meaning of things. This is also part of the illness, resulting from disturbances in the areas of the brain responsible for assessing situations and regulating mood. All these emotions, whether anxiety or the feeling of extraordinary power, are biological reactions. They do not testify to your personality or who you are. During an episode, the brain becomes oversensitive to signals from the environment and reacts excessively to what would normally be ignored. That is why the feelings during this period are like waves in a storm, huge, violent, and hard to predict. And yet there is something very important in this: your emotions are not the enemy. They are signals. They say, the system is overloaded, this is too much for me, I need help. Emotions do not mean that you are losing your mind. They mean that your brain is calling for support. And that call is natural. It is not you who failed, it is the nervous system that has come under too great a burden. Over time, you will learn to recognize these emotions earlier. In therapy, you will see that anxiety, arousal, or unreality can be the first signals of an approaching crisis. You will learn to treat them not as a threat, but as a call for gentle care for yourself. Because emotions, even the most difficult ones, always tell the truth about the fact that you need safety and balance. Historical examples of the illness schizophrenia may seem like an experience so unique, so personal, and so incomprehensible that a person starts to believe that something extremely rare or even unnatural has happened to them. The truth, however, is entirely different. Descriptions of psychotic states appeared in human history long before modern psychiatry existed. People in power, artists, thinkers, mathematicians, and poets, both great and completely ordinary, suffered from them. Understanding that you are not the only one, and that your experience fits into the history of many generations, can bring deep relief. It takes away the sense of uniqueness from the illness, demystifies it, and places it where it belongs, in the world of medical phenomena, not in the realm of the extraordinary. Throughout history there have been many figures who, with a high degree of probability, experience symptoms of schizophrenia or psychotic disorders. King Saul, a figure from the Old Testament, went through episodes of extreme anxiety, unreality, and persecutory thoughts, which modern researchers regard as very similar to paranoid psychosis. Vincent van Gogh, one of the most recognizable painters, described intense hallucinations and dramatic mood swings that go far beyond ordinary melancholy. Friedrich Nietzsche, a philosopher of immense intellect, struggled in the last years of his life with psychotic symptoms that disturbed his contact with reality. In more recent times, the best-known example is John Nash, a Nobel Prize laureate in economics. For many years he struggled with delusions and hallucinations that penetrated his personal and professional life. And yet, thanks to a combination of pharmacotherapy, family support, and his own determination, he regained stability and continued creative work for decades. You can learn about the story of this mathematical phenomenon by watching the moving biographical film A Beautiful Mind, which shows one thing: schizophrenia does not cancel genius, humanity, or the future. The point here is not to idealize the suffering of remarkable people or to create a romantic image of the illness. The point is the truth: schizophrenia is an illness that millions of people around the world have gone through, including individuals who left an enormous mark on the history of our planet. Your experience is not something unfathomable or rare. It is part of the human condition, difficult, painful, but possible to manage. Understanding this helps loosen the emotional weight of the illness. You are not the first. You are not the last. You are not alone. And just as many before you have returned to stability and meaning, so can you. Summary: schizophrenia is an illness that has been known for thousands of years and is well described in modern medicine. It occurs in about 1% of people and is neither rare nor mysterious. It has been experienced by kings, artists, and great thinkers. The most common form is the paranoid syndrome, which includes delusions, voices, assigning excessive meaning to ordinary stimuli, disorganized thinking, and strong anxiety. These symptoms are the result of biological changes in how the brain works: dopamine overactivity, synaptic disturbances, overload of the limbic system, and weakened functioning of the prefrontal cortex. They are not the patient's fault and do not say anything about their character or value. The key point of this lesson is to understand that the symptoms are the work of the brain, not the truth about the world. Anxiety, voices, or a sense of threat are predictable effects of the illness, and you can learn to recognize and manage them. Separating that self from the symptom and the ability to notice changes early is the foundation of stabilization. This knowledge gives a sense of safety, reduces fear, and prepares you for the next steps in therapy.